Here are some crazy things about addiction that no one ever talks about. And when I was doing research and navigating addiction, trying to make sense of it, trying to understand it, I was floored by some of the things that I discovered, and I'm going to share it all with you. So for me, addiction is something really personal. I lost my marriage to addiction. I met my ex-husband, back in 2009, and unbeknownst to me, he was an addict. His addiction or drug of choice was prescription medication. And back then, medication was not even considered addiction. Like, there was no grid for that. I had no idea that it even existed, that you could be addicted to medication. This would all come out way later, and even the way the public navigates that, shifted so much since that time. But watching how he dealt with things was really eye-opening to me. And I was that wife, and I found out about his addiction a few days before our first daughter was born. But navigating the journey of being with an addict, of living with an addict, taught me a lot. And I remember thinking to myself, I am going to find everything out about addiction because I'm going to save him. I wanted to keep my family together, and I was going to rescue him. And of course, I didn't think that I was living in like a savior complex, but I totally was. And so that led me on this path to, deep diving and researching and trying to make sense and understand addiction, because it is a complicated thing, but it doesn't have to be. And so I'm going to simplify it. So the first thing about addiction is that I realized that we are all addicts, actually. And our drug of choice is different person to person. And it's really a matter of time before we find our drug of choice. In this culture of experimentation, if you keep experimenting, you will eventually find something that triggers the brain and makes the dopamine, kick in. And if you have unresolved stuff, because the underlying issue of addiction is the same for everyone, if you're that person, then you will keep going to that thing. The first thing that I really have an issue is when people say disease, when they call addiction a disease, because addiction is not a disease. When you have a disease, that is something you cannot help. But addiction, you can't help it. You just maybe don't have the bandwidth, the strength, the tools, the understanding, the healing to actually navigate recovery. But it's not a disease. A disease is something you do not or cannot choose. Addiction, you have the choice. When you say that statement, it's like you're giving the addict permission to continue, and you're validating that he can't or she can't help what they're doing. It promotes the addict avoiding things that they need to confront and deal with. And then it also encourages them to avoid the responsibility of their behaviors and actions. When you just say it's a disease, you can't help it. The last reason I have an issue with this is because it promotes this helpless state. When you believe this lie, you feel helpless against the problem and you submit to it instead of attacking it full on. And I do believe in a God who can heal everyone, including the mind of an addict and the soul of an addict. And I believe in a supernatural God. I've seen him work in countless people's lives. And so I don't want to dismiss the fact that God can come in and completely set you free in a second. Sometimes it's work that you need to do, but sometimes it's just a moment that God, comes and completely heals you. Addiction isn't any more difficult than overcoming trauma. They're kind of, two wheels of the same, car. We sometimes put addiction on this pedestal of like, it's so hard. No, it's not that hard. It's just as hard as overcoming trauma. They both demand. And why sometimes addiction becomes harder is the addict, instead of dealing, goes to something to make them feel better. And that's why it can become harder, because they don't allow themselves to be in uncomfortable and difficult situations. They numb them. And so when you don't use the muscle of withstanding difficulty or feeling difficult feelings or feeling difficult things, and you've gotten so used to making yourself feel better all the time, which is what addiction is, you go to that thing or that substance or that food or whatever, then you don't confront that deeper thing. Other thing with addiction is there's a lot of isolation with people who are addicts. A lot of addicts isolate themselves, and it is to their detriment. There was a study in 1977 that was done called the Rat Pack by Professor Bruce K. Alexander. And in this study, they took rats and they put them in a cage. In one cage, they had one rat isolated with the different drugs. In another cage, they had a bunch of different rats. They had like different activities, like, the wheels that they run on, different, like a park type environment, and that had different activities for these rats. So what they found is the isolated rat went to the drugs and kept using the drugs and eventually overdosed. But in the cage with all the activities and all the rats, even though there were drugs in that cage, the rats were not interested. And so it's a huge sign about what isolation does for the addict. With the rats in the cage that just had the drugs and nothing else, when you have no purpose in your life and you have no activities and nothing that you're doing, then you just keep going back to feeling good for whatever short-term feeling that you have. You keep going to the drug. But when there is purpose in your life, when there is a meaning in your life, when you are in pursuit of something and you are doing life with other people, you are much less interested in the drug. And that is a fact. At the end of the day, all addiction really is, and this is such a simple word that nobody's gonna tell you because no one talks about addiction like this. But when you strip everything away, what addiction is simply a pattern. That's right. It's a pattern. When I feel something I don't want to feel, when I feel uncomfortable, when emotions come up, I go to this thing that makes me feel better. I use this substance, I eat this food, I go have sex with somebody. When I'm going through something emotional that does not feel good, I do this. And the more I do that, the more I respond that way, that becomes a pattern in my life. And I just keep doing it over and over and over again, to the point that even if I wanted to stop, I'm so used to this pattern that it's like second nature to me. You know how when you drive in a car and you keep going to the same place every single day, you don't even remember sometimes your drive. You don't remember getting there. You just are so in autopilot. Addiction kind of becomes like that. Your autopilot, your default is to go to that thing so you no longer feel uncomfortable. To go do that thing so you don't feel the tension and you don't feel the feelings you don't want to feel. So for a lot of people, if they don't confront and sit with the negative feelings and figure out what causes them to use, they're going to keep using. Another thing that is so interesting when I was doing my research is that a lot of addicts have a positive association with that drug. And the association that you have with that addiction is going to either make you do it or not do it. So for example, when it comes to medication, for me, it's such a negative thing because I saw what it did to my ex-husband. And I know in times past when I have used something, it felt really good. And I knew that I could easily be addicted to this. And the thought of being addicted freaked me out so much that I just would avoid it like the plague. And so my association with medication, it's negative. I don't want to be a slave to something. I don't want something to master me. And so I avoid it at all costs. When I look back at with my husband or my ex-husband, his association was positive. He's like, when I take this thing, I feel good. He would tell me, I feel normal when I take it. And in his mind, he had this belief that when you're stressed and you feel negative, that feeling those things are not normal. And so he would take a substance to feel normal because he had a misunderstanding of what normal actually felt like. And so he was so used to, when I feel uncomfortable, I take that because that makes me feel normal. That makes me feel good. Psychology today says that to protect one against a disturbing emotion or to feel euphoric, the addict obsesses about the next encounter with a relished object of choice. Addiction is the most powerful mechanism to escape stressful things. And actually, Yale Medical says that the brain remembers and the dopamine, and it associates that dopamine to something positive. And so the dopamine comes from the addictive substance. So the person who is seeking the drug has that association and the dopamine when they use that object or that substance. And so it becomes driven by a habit and not from consciousness or rational decision making, just like I had talked about, where you're on autopilot. So when you are so used to, when you feel negative or you feel uncomfortable, your association with that drug makes you use, and you make it such a habit and such a pattern that you don't build up the mechanisms to suffer, to be uncomfortable. And really, the people who are the most powerful and the strongest have built up this ability to withstand suffering. The better you suffer, the more free you become and the stronger you become. And so many people don't want to suffer, so they're always medicating to have that dopamine rush. And that becomes a pattern behavior. And so you see what that addiction does to that person. I know that everything in us wants to make this more complicated, but it really isn't. It's simply a pattern of behavior. It is something that an addict does not strengthen, and they just keep doing it over and over again, and their association to that thing is really positive. And so, having said that, one of the greatest things you can do is change your association, and you keep thinking about it, because our brains don't, when we think of something and we obsess over something, it doesn't know if we're actually experiencing it in real time or it's a thought. That's how powerful your thoughts are. You've heard of the parents who catch their kid, smoking a cigarette, and then they make that kid smoke the entire pack to the point where it makes them sick. Why is that powerful? It's because when you are doing that, your association to that drug of choice turns from positive to negative. So when we can shift the association, that will trigger us to behave differently. When we can withstand discomfort and negative feelings, that will help us shift the association and shift the pattern. And one thing I'm going to just wrap up with is that Jesus can set you free. I would encourage you to fast and pray. There were things in my life that I felt like I was a slave to, and I couldn't break free from it. And I was trying all the things and doing all the work, and I still felt like I was a slave. And so I went on a 21-day fast, and every fast looks different. What you fast, how you fast, that could be up to you. But I fasted and prayed and sought the Lord. And He encountered me in a personal, dynamic way. And when He encountered me, something shifted within me. Like, I actually felt the tangible presence of God. And it was actually on my last day when I fasted, but something happened in me where I knew that I had the power now, that this thing wasn't going to master me anymore. I wasn't going to be a slave to it, because there's something supernatural that happened. So I wouldn't dismiss the supernatural power of God to set you free. But there is associations and there is patterns that we got to break. And if you can get this, then you will never have to be an addict, and you will never have to be a slave to anything or anyone. Thank you for watching.